Welcome to the Liberty Experts podcast, where all your liberty questions are answered, discussed, and debated by experts. Now, here are your liberty experts, Tim Moen and David Birnbaum.
All right, Liberty Expert Nation, special treat for you today. This is where you, our listeners, get involved in the podcast. If you are subscribed to us on Subscribestar and you're a rainmaker, you make it rain on us, you get an opportunity to come on our podcast as a guest and talk to us about a subject that you're passionate about. So we have a rainmaker on today. We have Cedric Ramirez, and Cedric wants to talk with us about a subject that I really love, which is secession, the right to secede, to leave your country, to break off from your country or your nation and go your own way. And so, Cedric, welcome to the podcast. Happy New Year.
Oh yeah, Happy New Year. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for being a big supporter of us. We appreciate it.
Well, no worries. I wanted to talk about secession because the election last year, 2020, in the U.S., and then also the Canadian election, the year before. In Canada, like after Justin Trudeau won a plurality of seats in the House of Commons, then I saw on social media like a lot of people from your province, Alberta, were agitating for secession, and there's like, I heard there's a Wild Rose party or something, like there's it's like it was founded recently or it came from like an Alberta Independence Party. First of all, Cedric, thank you for saying that. We do, us Albertans do want to secede. A lot of us from you Laurentian elites out there in Ontario. There's a new, I think they're reinvigorating the Wild Rose Party here in Alberta, restarting it. The original Wild Rose leader from the original Wild Rose Party, I think, is launching it. There's also another federal party that we're going to be competing with on the stage called the Maverick Party. Pretty cool name. And their primary goal is to be basically like the Parti Québécois is in Quebec, which is kind of like a separatist party, which is kind of West First chauvinist party type thing. So yeah, and you are right. There has been a huge increase in separation and secession from Canada out west here. The Wexit movement started as a result of it. I've spoken at a couple of conferences, and in fact, it's interesting because we've had some secessionists in the States reach out to us. I spoke via Zoom to a California group, CalExit, and they are very different than the Albertan exit movement politically, in that they're more left-leaning, and their primary concern was how Donald Trump was imposing these mandates like closed borders and removing regulations around the environment and different things like that. So it was interesting to see that these people had me, a libertarian who probably doesn't agree with many of their policies, speaking at their conference, but their primary role was, look, let's secede, let's go our separate ways. There's no, we have wildly different viewpoints here, and why not, instead of continually fighting and squabbling in this marriage, why don't we just peacefully go our separate ways and be friends from afar, kind of thing. So yeah. All right, because I read the Buffalo Declaration from last year, and it talked about how the land of Alberta and Saskatchewan used to be together, used to be not politically divided, and it was called Buffalo. But when that land entered Canadian Confederation,
it was split into two, and the Buffalo Declaration doesn't mention Wilfrid Laurier, but he was the prime minister at the time, and it said, like, the Declaration had said that this weakens their the power of that area, but does it really? Because if you with two provinces, that's technically like more senators in Ottawa, right? Or am I thinking about it wrong? Does it really make you weaker when Alberta and Saskatchewan are divided?
Well, I don't. It doesn't make it. I mean, I suppose if we were one province, let's say, if Alberta and Saskatchewan were a province called Buffalo, we might have fewer senators. We might have a little bit. I don't know. Yeah, that's an interesting question, and I don't know what the best way to run a centralized government is. I mean, I'm an anarchist. I don't think government has the right to exist. I think it's a criminal gang and of thugs, and it creates disorder and chaos and ruins people's lives. I like Murray Rothbard's quote. Murray Rothbard said, "Once one concedes that a single world government is not necessary, then where does one logically stop at the permissibility of separate states? If Canada and the United States can be separate nations without being denounced as in an impermissible state of anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States, New York State from the Union, New York City from the state? Why not Manhattan secede? Each neighborhood, each block, each house, each person. Why can't you stop? And so to me, secession is the idea of decentralizing authority, getting it closer to the individual. That's why I support secession. I'd rather have 7 billion nations than 200 or whatever. I don't know why 200 or 270 or whatever it is the right number of nation states. I don't know who determined that Canada, this landmass up to this, parallel is Canada, and this is the United States, and you're part of Canada, and you're part of the United States. Who made me part of this nation? It's a bunch of thugs that want to rule us. They're cattle farms, or we're essentially tax livestock, and the tax farmers have kind of put their fence on the 49th parallel or whatever. That's where the warring group of tax farmers has agreed to kind of peacefully settle their dispute, I guess. And that's what makes a nation. And then what makes Alberta? Who determined where the borders were and who all is an Albertan and who isn't? Who are those people? Because I didn't get a say in that. So why do I, why would I respect that that imposition? And so, but I'm also a realist. I understand, we're never going to have a situation where humans aren't trying to rule each other. And so we're probably mostly always going to end up with states, with governments where we have, rulers imposing their will on us. And so, but I do think that the closer we can get to that individual, the better off it's going to be, the more peaceful the world's going to be, the less power these imperialist governments are going to have. So I'm all for secession for that reason.
Oh, all right. Because I also wanted to talk about how a little bit about how Canada was formed, because in the there were two big conventions in the 1860s, the 1864 Quebec Convention, and then the 1867 Charlottetown Convention, in which the different colonies were talking about creating a federation, and yeah, it was they talked a lot about some some people wanted more, wanted the colonies to have more power, while other people wanted the federation or the central authority to be more powerful, because they were looking at the United States, and in the 1860s they had a war, and they wanted the people who wanted a strong central authority, which included John A. Macdonald. They wanted a strong central authority, so that they would have a strong united British front against the Americans. And because if you there were five, I think there were five colonies at the time, or four, depending on how you want to look at it. There was New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PEI, and then the United Province of Canada, which was Ontario and Quebec. They were united under one legislature, because this was due to the Act of 1841, in which united Ontario, which was called Upper Canada, and Quebec, which was called Lower Canada, into one legislature, where both sides have an equal number of seats. And actually, Wilfrid Laurier, but during this time, he was in his 20s, and he opposed this confederation, because he thought that Quebec would lose its identity. And there's even today, some people in Quebec, they want the secession, and they've had Quebec's had two referendums, and neither of them pass, which is why Quebec is still in confederation. But I guess it's better in Canada than in the United States, because in the United States, when people think of secession, they automatically think of their civil war, and how they think that some people think that secession automatically leads to a war, but it doesn't. When they were having their referendums, the central government of Canada,
Oops.
the federal government, wasn't threatening.
Sorry, Cedric, your connection is getting sketchy there. I missed that last 30 seconds or so. You dropped there for about 30 seconds. I think you're looking better now, so try that again.
Oh no.
There you are.
Okay. Oh, where did you lose me?
I can't remember. You were talking about. I can't remember what you're talking about, to be honest.
All right. Because all right, I'll start from how in America, when people use the word secession, they immediately think of the Civil War,
right.
and they think that they immediately think that war is inevitable if a state threatens secession.
Yeah.
But at least in Canada, that doesn't happen, because during those two referendums in Quebec, nobody was threatening Quebec with invasion. They the people in Quebec, I think some of them feel like there's just too much power in Ottawa.
Yeah.
And
there's been plenty of historical instances of peaceful secession, right? I mean, the Cold War ended without a shot being fired, and this is something that conservatives need to crow about, because it was under conservative kind of foreign policy, where they were non-interventionists at the time, and they weren't going to nuke people, and they were all about diplomacy, and the USSR crumbled under its own weight, and a bunch of countries or nations formed out of that former Soviet bloc. I'm sure there was conflict and skirmishes there as people kind of vied, but it wasn't an all-out civil war type situation. So conservatives actually need to tell this story more, because leftist mainstream media is never going to talk about that. But there's an instance of secession. Yugoslavia, I believe, is another one, and there's all sorts of cases of peaceful secession.
Oh yeah. I think I've told you this before, but in 1991, there is this American history professor. His name is Eric Foner. He's a Marxist, and he wrote in The Nation magazine, pleading to Gorbachev not to let the different Soviet republics secede, and that they should copy Abraham Lincoln, because
Right.
that's what he did. He used force to keep the states from leaving the Union.
Yeah, that's what the Civil War. Most people don't realize they're told the propaganda that the Civil War was fought over slavery, and in fact, it was Abraham Lincoln was very clear. It was about preserving the Union. He didn't want the South to secede, and later on it became about slavery. And war propaganda after the fact is quite often used to kind of rewrite history or whitewash it so that some evil things don't look so evil and look actually virtuous and noble after the fact. But yeah, in Canada, we have, in theory, at least, a peaceful mechanism to secede, right? It's called the Clarity Act. And under the Clarity Act, if you have over 50%, like a clear majority of the people vote in a referendum with a clear question about separation, that then a province may secede. Now, there's some caveats to it, which, the devil's in the details, right? It's in the fine print, and, it talks about special interests or people with an interest in the matter, other parties might voice their concerns. And so you can imagine First Nations or other provinces that want a clear trade route across Canada or this or that might throw up some blocks. So it sounds like fairly simple and straightforward in the Clarity Act, but the reality of this happening, I think, are not good, right? First of all, a majority of Albertans do not want to secede, and even if they did, we don't have a government that would be willing to put forward that question of referendum. If any provincial government that took power that might be willing to do that would feel quite a bit of pressure and be bribed by powerful interests to not put that question forward. Then you'd have to get everyone on board, and there'd be a propaganda war. I think it's highly unlikely that we would ever secede via the Clarity Act. I think a more likely route for secession would be Canada collapses under its own weight, like the Soviet Union, and we just cannot, we can no longer rely on the federal government to be able to hold the union together. They become too weak because they just can't extract any more money out of us. They've basically, the host has killed the organism, and Canada's dead, and we rebuild in our own separate kind of jurisdictions or areas, and secede that way. But I don't know. What are your thoughts? How do you think secession could happen? How could Albertans who want to secede make this happen?
It'd be I don't know. I think it's hard to say, because it's when as you said, like, a lot of people don't want to secede in Alberta, but it might be like geographical, like, as in maybe certain areas of Alberta might want to secede, but that'd still be hard to do, just like legally speaking.
Hmm.
Because is the province gonna even allow all these people to to all those to if they're if there's a region that wants to secede, is the province gonna even allow them to secede? Because but I don't know, it would
Yeah.
it I I don't live in Alberta, but I'm sure, yeah, it is really hard from it looks
Well,
really hard from your.
and I mean, let's look at another case here. I remember I think it was in the 90s, might have been the 80s, when I remember on the news, the Oka standoff, right? And this had all to do with First Nation sovereignty, when they were trying to kick a developer off what they considered their land, when they were trying to develop a golf course or something. And the province moved in to, enforce this developer's claim to build this golf course, and they put up a blockade with armed warriors, and basically a standoff ensued. I think I'm trying to remember. I think someone was killed in the standoff, but it was relatively peaceful. Other than that, it wasn't like the province pulled. And eventually, I think it was the Kanawaki Reserve or something like that. They basically enforced their sovereignty just by having a few guys with guns saying, "Thou shalt not cross," and we're willing to die for this, and we're willing to pick up arms, and you're going to have to kill us to make this happen. And the province and the feds weren't willing to kill them to do it. So now they actually have. It's almost they basically have their own nation in a sense. I was watching a documentary where I think something like 80% of the world's gambling servers are located on the Kanawaki Reserve, and that's because Canadian jurisdiction cannot reach them. They have their own government essentially that doesn't answer to the feds, and the feds aren't going to screw with them, all because a few guys with guns stood on the borders and said, "Thou shall not pass. You're going to have to kill us to take our land," or whatever. So there's another pathway. I'm thinking too of at Amon or the Bundy standoff in the U.S., where the Bureau of Land Management wanted to take this. The federal government claimed this land to be theirs, but the Bundys had been farming it or ranching it or grazing their cattle on it for generations, and so they felt their claim was stronger, and they just got a bunch of their buddies with guns. The standoff ensued. The federal government didn't want to have blood on its hands. They didn't want to have that PR nightmare, and so they backed off, and not a shot was fired. So there's another potential pathway to secession there, and I guess that's essentially how Canada is separate from the U.S. in a sense. A bunch of guys with guns, dissuaded them, and that's probably how all nations really are formed. That's how these boundaries we call borders are drawn. It's like, okay, we'll, for the sake of not spilling any more blood or not having a bloodbath, we'll just draw a line in the sand here, and that's your side and this is our side, and let's just respect that and go our separate ways. So that maybe that's that would be a pathway forward if push really came to shove at the end of the day. But part of the problem here in Canada is that we have we're even more intrinsically linked to you Laurentian elites than we would be if we were under a U.S. system, right? Because we have equalization payments, and so Albertan taxpayers, send their income tax to Ottawa by threat of getting shot if we don't, if we resist, right? And then that money gets distributed to the have-not provinces, and they're usually the socialist hellhole provinces that are in fiscal dire straits because they have so many regulations and so much redistribution going on that their provinces are suffering, and then these same provinces refuse to allow our product to get to market by blockading our pipelines and doing different things like that. So if anyone, so I would think that under the current system of confederation that we have, the weak constitution that we have, the right in our constitution, I believe is the wording that allows for equalization payments to take place. In fact, I think it's even mandated in there, maybe. I can't remember now. But our constitution is terrible, and we don't have a really good mechanism to secede.
Yeah, I'm not sure which part of it. Like I know, like I know it's been equalization's been in Canadian Confederation since 1957, when Louis Saint Laurent was prime minister, and but like I'm not sure which part of the Constitution, because part of the Canadian Constitution is like partly unwritten. Like there's a bunch of different stuff in it, not just like the founding documents, the British North America Act. There's a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, here we go. It's section 36.2. So 36.2 is basically a constitutional requirement whereby less prosperous provincial governments are given funds to provide their residents with public services that are reasonably comparable to those in other provinces. So it's not exactly equalization, but it's a requirement that the federal government help out the have-not provinces. But how is the federal government going to help out the have-not provinces other than by taking money from the income tax, where Albertans are a huge contributor, and then giving that have-not province more money than it would give Alberta, for example.
I see. But yeah, like you said, like equalization, which it's not in the United States, because United States, each state is equal. Like while Canada, I feel like the provinces aren't equal, don't come into Confederation equally. If like I'm not a lawyer, but that's how it seems. Like I think like Manitoba, or one of the Western provinces, I remember, like came into being like through like a statute, and it put certain restrictions on that province.
Right.
And
then we have territories, right? And then we have First Nations, and we have all these different kind of different entities with different stature, let's say, in Confederation. You're right, where they're not equal players. But I guess that's kind of true in the States too. They have the Electoral College, where the so-called flyover states wield a bit more power per capita than say California or New York, because they don't want basically the high density population cities to have all the say in federal policy there, which I guess makes some sense. But the answer to that would be just to make to basically strangle the federal government to what we might call a minarchist state, where all they do is provide maybe a Supreme Court and a bit of policing across jurisdictional lines, and then a military or something to protect the borders and protect from invasion, and nothing more. Like, not all this education stuff and environment stuff and all the other stuff that gets people worked up, where the federal government imposes, let's say pro-choice on everyone, or pro-life, or this or that. Once they start meddling more than just the basics of, we're going to protect the borders and provide some policing and that's it. Let each state develop their own set of laws and rules, and let people vote by walking with their feet to whichever state suits their needs. If they had that, I don't think secession would be such a big issue right now. If we had that in Canada, let's say, secession wouldn't be such a big issue, right? If we, like I've always said, we could have national unity if the government was a limited libertarian government. If all it did was, police, military, and courts, and then allow the provinces to write their own laws, do their own stuff with healthcare and roads and everything else, we wouldn't have all this squabbling. Like federal elections would be inconsequential. Like I wouldn't care who my member of parliament was or who the prime minister was. It could be a goddamn socialist for all I care. His power would be limited. Like he wouldn't be able to do anything, and it wouldn't impact my daily life at all. But now it's everything the federal government does impacts everyone's life. So it's like a battle of all against all. And right now under COVID, we're seeing the stark divide, right? We're seeing the stark divide between people who worship the cult at the altar of the state and want mandates and imposition of force on everything, and then those who are against all that, and these are obviously two very different types of people who ought to be able to go their separate ways in peace, but now they're being forced together in this in this imposition of statism, of big government that forces us together and forces my interests to step all over your interests and your interests to step all over my interests. There's going to be a winner. There's going to be a loser. One of you is getting shot. The other one's going to be holding the gun, and it pits us against each other in a war of all against all. I'm thinking of that scene in Gatineau, Quebec, where the neighbors called the police on their neighbors who were having a party with a few people, and a fight breaks out and the police arrest. And it's just, this is what our society is. And I have to think that if we have to go our separate ways, because there's some people that want big government, and then there's those of us who want little or no government at all. And how the hell are we going to get along? We won't tolerate it for much longer. Those of us who demand freedom and liberty or death, and at a certain point we're going to be willing to die to stop the erosion of our freedoms.
If we during the American Revolution, the Americans drafted the Articles of Confederation, which were their first constitution, and it was back then it was a much smaller government, because there was actually no executive, there was no president during this time. From they drafted the articles in 1777, and then they were fully ratified in 81, and then but then their new constitution, and their current one was ratified in 1789. But during this time, when they had the Articles of Confederation, the federal government was really small, because they had one chamber, and I think each state got the same number of members. I think it was each state got 3 members, and people make this analogy of how all the states chose to secede from the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution. And so why couldn't the southern states secede from the current constitution to make their own
right.
confederation? That's an argument I've heard.
Yeah, well, it should be everyone's right to secede. What are we, slaves? Well, don't answer that, because the answer is probably yes. If you can't secede, you're a slave. Well, Cedric, thanks for coming on. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Any points that we missed before we wrap up?
Okay. I just want to bring one more point.
Sure.
I read a couple years ago this article by Ludwig von Mises, and he was talking about how his view of Europe. He wanted like at least 1,000 different states in Europe, because how Europe was and is, like how each state was defined was often by language, but so you would have like minorities getting oppressed because their their language wouldn't be taught in like public schools. So Mises's ideal like view of Europe was that like there'd be at least 1,000 states, and like so that there wouldn't be tyranny of linguistic minorities. And like
Right.
I mean, there's not 1,000 states, and like right now either, and like
No.
and like I'm sure some people in Europe, they still feel like a little bit oppressed, or maybe a lot,
Sure.
because their language is not like the official language,
Yeah.
and even though like their ancestors were there for hundreds of years. But this was like something that Mises wrote like 100 years ago.
Yeah, and I think Hoppe has said similar things too, right? I mean, his vision is, thousands of city states, let's say. Cities could be looked at maybe as private property, and you could have someone who is the owner of that private property, of the infrastructure, making rules in that city, and trying to attract people by having the best set of rules and the best set of conditions that would bring in capital development and fees and whatnot to join that city. And you would have essentially, thousands of city states rather than one big conglomerate that imposes the rules on all these different cities, right? And because, here's the thing too, one of the biggest political divides we have is between people who live not in a city, like rural folk, and people who live in the city. And they have very different experiences of government and of other people. In the country, we never saw the government. We had no use for it. We had to be self-reliant. We had to defend ourselves from animals and burglars and trespassers. We had to provide for ourselves. We didn't have to worry about stepping on someone else's toe or bumping into someone or anything like that, right? Whereas in the city, you're stacked on top of each other. You're hustling and bustling in these public spaces, and there's got to be some rules in those public spaces. Even I admit that, right? I mean, we can't have people pooping on the sidewalk. We can't have people littering everywhere. Even though it's on a public space that, as a libertarian, I would say the government doesn't justly own it. It's but at the same time, it's not unowned either. And the ideal set of circumstances is those streets and those public areas would be privately owned, and the people, so there's got to be some rules in there managing interaction and managing the I guess social environment, so that people are driving on the right side of the road, and people are not pooping and littering and maybe swearing or walking around naked or whatever, right? You're going to want a set of rules in the commons if you choose to live in that city, and someone needs to make those rules. And so if you're an urbanite, you're like, yeah, we need rules. The government needs to impose rules, right? It makes sense to someone who lives in the city that there's this upper authority that's making rules. So this is where I think the divide largely comes from. Those of us who grew up in the country and those who grew up in the city have very much different experiences of life, and things make sense. And this is why, to me, it's like, okay, if we get rid of obviously we can't have the federal government making rules as if they were a city owner for everyone across this entire huge landmass called Canada. That is not working. That is destroying our nation. And the more rules you make and the more power you exert, the more you destroy. So let's break it down. Let's let city folk, choose the set of rules they want to live in, vote with their feet, and then leave the rural folk to do their thing without any government and imposing rules, and get have their social cohesion from community barbecues and community dances and different things like that, and churches, and and let's just go our separate ways.
Yeah. Oh, I just want to ask you one more thing.
Sure.
So the people, like, since I'm not from Alberta, I wouldn't know this, but I'm guessing people in Edmonton and Calgary, they they're a lot different from like people who live in the rural areas then, from
Yeah.
your experience.
For sure. I mean, and I will say that Calgary and Edmonton are two different cities as well. In Edmonton is very progressive, very left-leaning, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I think probably because we have the provincial government, like Edmonton's the provincial capital, and so you've got a lot of government. So you've kind of got a welfare mentality that's grown up there, and then in Calgary, it's a very spread out city. Like I think it's one of the biggest cities geographically around. Like it's spread out and it's less dense than most cities, and most of the people that live in Calgary are there because of all the oil field offices. So these are people that come from the oil field, that come from rural areas where when you're a kid growing up on a farm, you either work on the farm and work to take over from your dad, or you go out and work the rigs. And so, the people in Calgary, I find, have a much more of an attitude that a rural folks would have, whereas in Edmonton, it's more of it's a lot less of that. There's not the oil offices. It's much more like service industry and what you would find in, they just don't have that sensibility about them. It's more of a welfare city.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I like, so since I've never been to either, like,
but I mean, that being
differences.
said, I mean, Calgary has a very progressive mayor. They've got a gay Muslim Arab that is their who's very progressive. That is their mayor, right? So like it's still there to a large extent, but you can notice a difference between Edmonton and Calgary. Like in Edmonton, you'll see socialist, communist propaganda downtown on White Ave regularly. Like I went to the Fringe Festival, which is like a kind of a carnival, a street festival, street performers, and these socialists had a table set up where they were offering to explain, offer a critique of the Conservative Party from a Marxian perspective, and they just openly, walk around proud communists. I doubt you would see much of that in Calgary, but in Calgary they're very centrist and progressive in terms of the politics. But also, like, even in Fort McMurray, I saw progressive, like all the people on council were progressives from out east. There were people that migrated to Fort McMurray for the economic opportunity, and they kind of came from Ontario and different things. All these people make their way to town council, and they are quite often, most of them are progressives. People that from the Liberal Party and different things like that make their way onto town council because who knows? I mean, I think that maybe the rest of the people will just there to work and make a living and aren't that interested in politics. So they don't look at politics as an attractive thing to get into. Whereas all these Laurentian elites that migrate to the city, they lust for power and control over other people. These hicks need our patronage. They need our paternalism. They need us to use science to manage them properly. Because look at these people digging in the dirt, drinking beer, partying. They need to. So, I think that generally speaking, government attracts the worst kind of people. And even the so-called conservatives in power, like most hardworking conservative rural folk would never think about going into politics, but the ones that do generally have some progressive sensibilities where, we need to have some power here, and they're not afraid to exercise. I mean, Aaron O'Toole is a red Tory. He's got the best chance of winning because of that, probably. But there are none of these politicians Kenny included, and all these UCP politicians going on vacations while they lock the rest of us down. I mean, these are essentially, you know, they have a particular mindset of we want to rule people. But most people that you would want in those positions are kind of like rural folk who just want to be left alone. And those people have no desire to get involved in politics at all. They have no desire to push back. And so, you know, maybe that's the answer. Maybe part of the answer, as I hear myself talking out loud, is to get more people, well, people like me. Like, I never had any ambition to get into politics. I had to be drugged into this political realm, kicking and screaming. It took someone 4 months of wearing me down and constantly arguing and debating me and you know, pleading with me before I said, fine, I'll step into the political ring. Well, you know, we need more people like me that don't want to get involved in politics at all to actually get involved in politics, because those are the people that you kind of want in those leadership positions. You don't want the people that have been hungry to rule over others for years. And they've made all the steps and done all the, you know, done everything they need to do to get themselves into a position where they can finally be a ruler over all of us. Because those are the people that are winning right now. Those are the people that are getting those spots. We need more people who have those kind of rural sensibilities of people just need to be left alone. And I'm here just to stop the government from doing more stuff. You know, I'm not going to do anything for you. In fact, I'm going to roll back all this stuff. You know, because people, you need to be responsible for your own governance. You need to be responsible for your own lives. You know, it's enough of this. But yeah, I guess.
I'll just make one last comment.
Sure.
You're reminding me of in Friedrich Hayek's The Road to Serfdom. There's a chapter called "Why the Worst Get on Top," and so
right.
You might want to look. Like, I mean, I like the entire book, but yeah, that chapter is I'm being reminded of by you. Why the worst get on top? I think it's chapter 10. I don't remember the exact number.
I'll definitely check that out. Hayek's Road to Serfdom. It's a great book. It's been years since I've read it, but yeah. I mean, and look, I've known this intellectually for a long time, since reading that book and reading other libertarian material that tells you that. But look, you know, now that I'm in politics, that I talk with these people, that I'm close to them, you know, that I navigate through municipal and provincial and federal politics and kind of network with people, I see very clearly, empirically with my own eyes, listening to these people talk, that, yeah, I mean, that's who would get involved in politics, is the very kind of people that Hayek and libertarians have been saying for years would get involved because of the incentive structure, right? The incentive structure. So, all right, Cedric, well, listen, thank you. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for being a huge supporter of this podcast. And to all you Liberty Expert listeners out there, if you want to do this, become a rainmaker on Subscribestar, and we'll get you on the podcast, and you can have a shot to chat with David or I or both of us. And yeah, I'm David sends his regrets for not being here. I think that it would have been fantastic to have David here, although I think this podcast would have gone for 2 hours, because you know, those objectivists and secession, that's kind of like oil and water to them. I sometimes get the impression that an objectivist, that their best state of affairs would be a world government imposing liberty from on high or something like that. And you know, I'm a decentralization guy. I want a decentralized government down to the individual. And this is why, you know, and by the way, this is where, like, to me, I think there's a kind of a distinction between minarchism and anarcho-capitalism, right? The idea that there ought to be a minimum state, and that's the best state of affairs, and the idea that we ought to do away with it altogether. And you know, if you think that the nation of Canada is the right size, well, why shouldn't it be smaller, you know, or bigger, you know? And so to me, like, there's really no distinction in my mind between a globalist and a nationalist. A nationalist is just a globalist on a slightly smaller scale. You know, we ought to be concerned about the individual, and so that's my goal. I think that's David's goal too. But I think you know, objectivists are a little bit confused about the nature of government and some of the things. But we'll leave that for another time. I don't want to get into a debate with David when he's not even here. So anyway, thanks, Cedric. Thank you, Liberty Expert Nation. And until next time, I'm Tim, and that's been Cedric.
Thank you.